Masechet Yevamot Daf Nun Bet. We are going to be continuing to analyze the opening Mishnah, and we start off with a stylistic question, which is the Mishnah opens with the machloket between Rabban Gamliel and Chachamim that we analyzed yesterday, regarding is en get achad get, or do we say yesh get achad get? But here's the question. Then we say kesad. Usually kesad is now should give an example of what we just spoke about. But instead, the kesad opens with someone who does ma'amad and then gives a get to one yevama. The machloket here was talking about one yavam and two yevamot. It gives a get to one and a get to the other. So this is not an example of that, but rather one yevama and not get achad get, but rather get achad ma'amad. So there's a disjunction here with this ketzad. So we ask kesad asa ma'amad vechule. Hi get achad getu, right? Is this a case of get achad get that you would say kesad? And the answer is no, it's not. Amar Rav Yehuda hachi kamar get achad getu ma'amar achad ma'amar kedamaran. Rather, Rav Yehuda explains as follows: the law of get achad get and ma'amar achad ma'amar is as we said. That is subject to the machloket. Close category. And now something new. Yavam echad vivama achat kesad hataratan. But now I want to tell you something different about if there's one yavam and one yavama, and he performs two actions, different actions upon her, then how do you undo that? And so it goes on, it says, Asa ma'amar bivim tov v'natan laget tzricha hamenu chalisa. He does ma'amar first, and then he gives a get. Then you cannot go through with the yibum, because, the ma'amar introduced them, connected them, but then the get severed them, so you require chalitza in that case, and so on. Good. So now we understand that the kesad is not a continuation of the first machloket. Next. Asa ma'amar u'ba'al harezo kemisvata. We saw if one is one yavam and one yavama, and first he does ma'amad, a type of kiddushin, which we'll explain soon further today, and then he does bi'ah. So the Mishnah says this is the proper way of doing the mitzvah. Good. Lema misaya le Rav Huna de'amar Rav Huna misvat yevama mekadesh ve'achar kach bo'el. So this Mishnah seems to be a support for Rav Huna, who also said that the proper way of doing yibum is to do kiddushin first and then do be'ayla. So that is exactly the same. And then we answer, not necessarily. Ema af ze kemisvata. Rav Huna seemed to have meant that one must do ma'amad and then bi'ah. But the Mishnah doesn't necessarily mean that. The Mishnah may simply mean this is also a way of doing the mitzvah. In other words, there's two alternatives. One is the simple deoraita one, in which the yavam just does bi'ah, straight to that, with nothing in between, and so that is a proper way. And now the Mishnah is adding that if you do ma'amad first and then bi'ah, that is also the proper mitzvah. Okay, so it's not necessarily supporting Rav Huna, who seems to think that you should and must do kiddushin first. Okay, then we ask, Peshita, if that's what the Mishnah is teaching, that you can also do it with ma'amad first, isn't that obvious? If you can do it with just bi'ah, then adding another further step, supporting step, ma'amad first plus bi'ah, of course that would be good. This just sounds like that should be even better. Kal v'chomes, why do you even need to tell me such a case? And the answer is sakadatecha mina kevan damar mor haosem amar bivimto parcha hemenu zikat yevamin vehala alav zikat erusin v'nisuin, because the master said above a statement that someone who does ma'amar with the yavama, then the zikah of as a yavam, right? That responsibility to do yibum leaves, and instead is replaced by a new zikah, that which is on the track of erusin and nisuin. In other words, there's two different tracks in the Torah to acquiring a woman. One is the normal erusin and nisuin, and the other one is the more rare Yibum. These are two different tracks, but one you can switch tracks in the middle by if you have a Yavam and Yevama, and he does this Kiddushin, now he switches tracks to the other one. And so we have a statement like that, and then you'd have to follow through with the normal requirements like that. So Emma lab mitzvah kaved. Now I might have thought that because this is a tradition that we had, that when the Yavam does Ma'amar and then follows through with a bi'ah that would be the equivalent of nisu'in, you might have thought that now he doesn't get the mitzvah of yibum anymore. He lost when it says parcha himenu, right? The zikah of Yavam left him, so maybe he doesn't get that mitzvah. So kamash malan, that's why the Mishnah says, also this is a mitzvah. Don't think that by doing ma'amar first you undid the yibum mitzvah. No, you do that too, and so therefore this is a good way to do it. And in fact, there's even a better way to do it, as we're going to see right now. So, Gufa Amar Rav Huna. Now we're going to analyze further the statement of Rav Huna. Misvat Yevamin Mekadesh V'achar Kach Poel. Now we're going to expand it to the full quote that we only quoted partially before. So, Rav Huna says that the proper way to fulfill the mitzvah of Yibum is to do Kiddushin first, and only after that have intercourse. V'im ba'al ve'asam ma'amar kana. And if he did bi'ah first and then ma'amar, then he has acquired her. Now this doesn't make sense. Im ba'al ve'asam ma'amar peshita ta'kanya bebi'ah. If he did bi'ah first and ma'amar after, then of course he would be married. The first thing he does, the bi'ah, or he's already married at that point. The ma'amar, doing it ma'amar afterwards, makes no sense to do that in the second way. In the second position. Rather, what he means to say is, if he did just bi'ah without ma'amar, also he is married. So Rav Huna, in fact, says you can do just bi'ah, it's okay, but you can also do both. Do first Kiddushin and then Bi'ah. So both are good options. Okay, now we have a question. Vatanya loke. We have another braita that says if someone only does Bi'ah and skips the Kiddushin, he should get lashes. This is a negative. Right now, we're assuming that it means perhaps even on a deoraita level, as the pasuk says, "Ulkacha lo leisha v'yibema." Regarding Kiddushin, it says, "Take her as a wife and also do yibum." At least in the Talmud Yerushalmi, you learn from there that "Ulkacha lo leisha" means to do Kiddushin, and then v'yibema means that the bi'ah. So it's proper to not treat the woman in such a degrading way as only do bi'ah, but rather make her feel like a bride, and first do kiddushin, be mentally prepared, and only then the bi'ah. And if he doesn't do that, he gets lashes. So how come Rav Huna just says you could jump to just to bi'ah, and that's fine? And the answer is makat mardut midrabanan. The requirement for kiddushin is only midrabanan, even though we saw a hint from the pasuk, but actually it's not deoraita. So these lashes are not deoraita lashes. What Rav Huna meant is that on a deoraita level, yes, you can do just bi'ah, but this is not the best way to do it. On a drabanan level, you should also add first kiddushin. And if you don't do that, then midrabanan, the person will get malkut. Okay, and how do we see this? A proof that someone who does only bi'ah with his yevama is deserving of malkut. He should do the kiddushin first and treat her more respectfully. We see this from Rav. The Rav, mangid man de mekadesh bebi'ah. Rav would give lashes to a whole list of people. We're going to see who they are. A lot of interesting cases here. Number one, someone does kiddushin with bi'ah. We know that you could do kiddushin either with money, or you could write haret mikudeshet li on a piece of paper. You write the name, haret Mrs. So-and-so, Miss So-and-so, are mikudeshet li. And give her the shtad. That's the second way. And the Mishnah says you can do kiddushin with bi'ah. Be intimate with her for the sake of kiddushin, and then they will be status of kiddushin, and then after some months when they're ready for nisuin, then will be the second bi'ah that would consummate the marriage. So although technically, yes, that is a valid way of doing kiddushin, and perhaps even that may even be the quintessential Doraita way. Nevertheless, Rav would give lashes to someone who did that because it's inappropriate that they should not be engaged in some way first, connected in a different way first, and save bi'ah for the nisuin. Inappropriate to do that first. Uman de mekadesh bishuka. Also, if you do kiddushin, let's say money kiddushin, and you do it in the middle of the marketplace, that's not proper either, right? You just it feels like you just met someone and you just eloping and saying, hey, you look nice, how would you do kiddushin with me? You got to do it in a proper way, meet the parents, do it in front of witnesses, have the rabbi there. That's the more respectful way to do it. Also, someone who does kiddushin without a marriage agreement first, right? The parents have to meet, they have to say, how many camels and so on, and you do it in a proper, thoughtful way, and not just jump into the kiddushin without the agreement beforehand. Rav would also give lashes to someone who nullified a get. He would send a get with a messenger, and then after he sent the get, he says, no, I changed my mind. That get that is being sent is on its way, I cancel it. That's a bad thing to do, because on the other end, the messenger may not get the message in time not to give it. In the meantime, he will give it to her. She will think that she is divorced, and she'll go and marry someone else. Meanwhile, back at home, he actually canceled the divorce, and it's invalid, and then that will cause her to violate eshet ish, adultery. So one should not cancel a get. If someone does that, he would give him lashes. Or a similar case, if someone says, the people are pressuring him to give a get, and he really doesn't want to. So what he does is, the day before he's going to give a get, he gets together witnesses, says, listen, I'm going to send a get tomorrow, but I don't mean it. I'm canceling it from beforehand. And then she doesn't know. So the next day, he gives the get, misleading her. She thinks she's divorced. She'll go and get remarried. In the meantime, then he'll come and say, oh, look, I have witnesses that I said beforehand I never meant the get. That guy deserves lashes. Someone who treats a messenger of the sages in a light way. The sages send a messenger to says, come to court for whatever reason, and he mistreats the messenger. That's being disrespectful to the sages themselves, because they sent the messenger. Rav would also give lashes to someone who was excommunicated by the sages. He must have done some serious sin. The sages excommunicated him, and they expect him to come to court to say, here's what I did, I repent, please undo the excommunication. And this guy doesn't care. 30 days went by, and he's fine to be excommunicated. He couldn't care less what the rabbis do. He doesn't come to the Beit Din to try to see what he has to do to undo the excommunication. So then we go to the next level after excommunication is giving the guy lashes. Okay, and furthermore, Rav would also give lashes to Val Hatana de Da'er Bebe Hamohi, to a son-in-law who lives in his father-in-law's house. Okay, so this is a bit difficult because I am planning to live in my father-in-law's house this summer, and I know my brother-in-law, who is listening to this very lecture, is also planning on staying in our father-in-law's house this summer. So we may need to change our plans in order to avoid lashes. But actually, the Rambam codifies this. Ravad says if there is an area set aside for me and my wife, for him and his wife, a separate room, then it is permitted. Okay, so the idea is that this may lead to mixed dancing or worse things by having various couples in the house. If they're staying in his father's house, and it's not a problem, but the son-in-law being with other women who are not his mother, but rather in-laws, mother-in-law or sister-in-law, that could lead to problems. So the rabbis advise against it. However, they also put a limit on it only if you live there permanently. If you're just passing by, that's okay. If you just stay for a little while, it's permitted if it's not living there permanently. Okay. Hold on. We have a story of a certain person that just passed by the entrance, the doorway of his father-in-law's house, and Rav Sheshet came and gave him lashes. And so the answer is no. That guy was suspected of promiscuous activity with his mother-in-law, and therefore he should have stayed away from there totally. By even passing by, he's confirming those rumors, and so that's why he deserved lashes. But otherwise, if it's just passing by, it's okay. And according to the Avad, if everybody has their own room, that's also okay. The usual case might have been a kind of small house where everybody's sleeping in close quarters. Only that would be a problem. All right. So those are all the people that Rav would give lashes to. And so we see that also someone who just does bi'ah without kiddushin first is one of the people that gets lashes, so that's inappropriate. And the people from Nehar De'ah say, no, Rav would not give lashes to all of these cases, except for the person that does kiddushin with bi'ah. It's not appropriate to just go and do bi'ah without doing something to acquire her first with coin, with a ring, with a shtad, and someone who does that or without a marriage agreement first. Others say that Rav would give would give lashes even to someone who did have a marriage agreement first, the Tanaim that they would set, if he did it with bi'ah, because that is perisuta, literally means a breach. This is an immoral act. It's a licentious act to just take a wife only by bi'ah without a more formal process beforehand. Okay, very interesting. And now we come to a baraita that will expand on some other cases. Tenor Rabbanan. Kesad ma'amar. How do you do ma'amar? We've been speaking about it so much. What actually is the act? Natan la kesef or shaveh kesef. It means that he gives her either a coin or something that's worth money. And he would say, usually we say, Aret mikudeshet li, a person, you tell the woman, you are sanctified to me as a wife. In this case, he would say, Haret mikudeshet li, be'ma'amad yevamin, you are sanctified to me with this statement that is an intention to take you as a yevamah. So the formulation is a bit different, but essentially it's the same thing as a regular kiddushin. Ubishtar kesad, and now how would you do this? How would you do ma'amar with a shtar? So we ask on that. Bishtar kesad kedamaran. What do you mean? It's the same thing. You just write whatever you would say. You write down in the shtar that pilonit bat pilonit will be mikudeshet to me as a yevamah, ma'amar yevamin. Right. So that's all. What are you asking exactly about? Katavla al niyad or lacheres afapi she'en bo shaveh peruta haret mikudeshet li. All part of the question, right? This is what you would write on a piece of paper or on a piece of pottery. The point is that the paper or the pottery are worth less than the peruta. So broken piece of pottery, they were still useful, like a scrap paper. So you're not giving her anything that's worth money. So it's not less than a peruta, but you write on it haret mikudeshet li. So we know how to give a shtar. There's nothing interesting about that. Amar Abaye hachikama shtar ketuvat yevamin kesad. Abaye says no. The question that the Braita was asking is not how to do kiddushin with the shtar, how to do mamar with the shtar, but rather how do you write a ketuvah for her if it's yibum. The ketuvah in a general marriage will say the man is responsible to take care of all of her needs during the marriage, and at the end of the marriage will have to pay a certain amount. Now the Yevamah is different because, yes, he does have to take care of all of her needs, food, money, food, shelter, clothing, ona during the marriage, but the difference is a yavam does not have to pay her from his own money at the end of the marriage. That 100 zuz, whatever they agree, whatever amount he says he's going to give her, is paid by the dead brother's estate. So this ketuvah is going to look a little different. Katavla, Ana peloni bar peloni kabelit yat pelonit yevamti alai lazun ulfarnesa karaui. So in this type of ketuvah, he says, I, so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, I accept upon myself this woman as my yevamah, and I accept upon myself the responsibility to feed and provide for her as is appropriate. But the final lump sum payment of the ketuvah, that will come from the deceased husband's estate. After all, the yavam did not ask to marry her. He didn't want to get into this in the first place, but rather was forced into it by the situation. So yes, he needs to step up and treat her as a wife, but he doesn't have to pay the ketuvah at the end. But there is an exception. If the deceased husband has no estate and leaves no money, then the rabbis instituted that the yavam has to pay the final amount of the ketuvah. The reason is that it should not be light in his eyes to divorce her. If there's no financial consequence of divorce, then anytime they have a little argument, she burns the soup, he says, get out of here, you're divorced. And that's not respectful, that's not appropriate to treat someone in that way. And therefore, this is the general reason why there is a ketuvah. If you put a financial obligation, and you can get divorced, but you're going to have to pay $100,000, so then he'll think twice about it and say, you know what, maybe I should forgive her for burning the soup. It's not a big deal. It's not worth $100,000. And so he'll work harder to repair the relationship. And so having that ketubah leads to stronger and more long-lasting marriages. Okay, wonderful. Ba'amine Abaye merabba. Now we have a question. Abaye asks of his teacher, Rabba, Natan lah get. V'amar, hare at megoreshet hemeni, v'at muteret lechol adam, mahu. If a yavam gives a yevamah, before they do yibum, he gives her a get, this divorce paper, but it doesn't have the regular formulation. The normal formulation of a get is, you are separated from me, and now you may marry anybody. That's the definition of getting divorced. But this one says, you are separated from me, so we can't be together, but I forbid you, you are not permitted to be with anybody else. So this is a kind of, jealous husband. He doesn't like his wife, but he also jealous, doesn't want to be with anybody else, might write something like this. In a regular case of marriage, this get would be null and void. This doesn't, he's not making a separation. She has to be permitted to others in order for it to be a get. But his question, Abaye's question says, what about for a yavam giving it to a yavamah? Is there a side to say that it is somewhat effective in this case? Okay, what would be the logic behind this question? Get yevamah d'rabanan hu. Get mahani beshet ish mahane b'yevamah. Since the get regarding yevamah, the whole thing is only d'rabanan. Really, giving a get to yevamah doesn't do anything on the doraita level, and it's only the rabbi said, well, it's going to look confusing with the other one. So if it's a get that would work in a regular marriage, then it would also work for a yevamah. But this get, since it wouldn't work even in a regular marriage, so there's no need to think that anyone's going to get confused, because even if this was given in regular marriage, it would be given no credence. So we don't have to assign it any validity now. It's just a bad get. Okay, so throw it out, and therefore you don't have to do anything. No consequences here. Or the other side of it is get lo mahane be'eshet ish lo mahane bivama. Get this is part of the same side. So this get, which does not work for an eshet ish, also will not work for yevama. All that is the first side of the question. That because it's a it's a bad get in a regular marriage, and the only reason why the rabbi said we have to worry about a get to Yevamah is because it gets confused with the get to a regular person, but this gets no good for a regular person, so it's no good for Yevamah also. That's all one side. Or maybe we say, people are confused. If they knew what they were talking about, then they wouldn't confuse Yibum with a regular marriage. But the whole point is that people may think that if a person, a Yavam, gives Yevamah this get, although the formula is not good, and then we don't follow up and we say, oh yeah, this is considered nothing, people will say, even in a properly written get, in a regular marriage, people will say, oh, I guess a get is nothing, and it doesn't actually do anything. And so it would still cause confusion, and therefore, even though the language is not good, we should still worry about such a get and prohibit this Yavam who gave such a get from performing Yibum afterwards, or any of the brothers from performing Yibum afterwards. Okay, so that's the question. Amar le Hashinan Dilmate Lachlufe Begita. Rava says, yes, indeed, it is confusing. People aren't going to look at the exact language. All they're going to see is that this guy gave a get to someone else, and then he went and he did Yibum, and or the brother did Yibum, and they're going to think that this is permitted in a regular case. One guy gives a get, and then the brother will come and do bi'ah, or lead to confusion and bad things. Mat kifla da babar hanan ela me'ata yeheb la niyara be'alma chinami de pasla. So the babar Hanan says, well, to what extent are you going to take this ad absurdum? What if he just gives her a blank piece of paper? Oh, people will look and think, oh, he gives her a piece of paper and says, here's your get. So people looking will say, oh, I guess he gave a get, and so now also this Yavam will have to do chalitzan, cannot do yibum after, and it will be prohibited to her relatives forever because he gave a blank piece of paper. And someone might think that it looks like a get. That doesn't make any sense. No one would ever say that. So why don't we say that this bad formulation should be like a blank piece of paper and not considered anything. We don't have to worry about what every crazy person thinks that doesn't look into it. Amar le hatam la pasel b'kehuna hacha kapasel b'kehuna. And Rabba's answer is, no, these two cases are different. If he gives her a blank piece of paper and says, here's your get, that's in any case, then she is permitted to a kohen. If he would die after, she's a widow, she's permitted to a kohen. That type of get is absolutely zero. Whereas if a man gives a woman this type of get that says, you are divorced from me, but you're still prohibited to other people, although it is not a fully valid get and she cannot go and marry anybody else, nevertheless, it is sufficiently valid that it'll disqualify her from marrying Kohen. She is considered a divorcee, lechumra, cannot be with a kohen. So how do we see that? We know this from a Braita de Tanya. V'isha gerusha me'isha lo yikachu. Kohanim cannot take a woman who is divorced from her husband. All right, they may not take. Afilu lo nitkasha ela me'isha lo yikachu. And we derive from here, even if she is only separated from her husband, they cannot marry her, even though she cannot be with anybody else. In other words, even though it's not a full divorce document, but because it does have some language in it, it's not a blank piece of paper, because it does say, you are prohibited to me, you are separated from me, from the husband, therefore that is enough to make her prohibited to a kohen as a divorcee. This is what we call something that is the scent of a get, a trace of a get, just like with smell. You walk into a kitchen and you smell the roast, and even though you're not eating it, but you smell it, and so you can get some benefit from that, even though it's not an actual, you're not actually eating it. So too with this get, even though it's not an actual get and does not actually allow her to marry, but nevertheless it's a trace, it's a smell of a get, and is sufficient to make her pasul lekehuna. Amar Rami bar Chama, Hare Amru, Amar Echad lelablar, Ketov get larusati, Leche she'echnesena agareshena, Hare ze get. Okay, another question. Again, this is now, comparing regular cases of marriage to Yibum, to see if they the consequences are similar. So we know a law regarding a regular marriage. If someone goes to the scribe and says, "Can you write a get to my betrothed?" He did kiddushin and is still waiting for nisuin. They would do it many months apart. And so my plan is, as soon as I have the wedding, I'm going to give her a get. Okay, why does he want to do this? I don't know. He wants to have the wedding, but then he doesn't really like her, and he's going to give her a get after. So is this valid? Here's the thing. You can't write a get to a single woman, someone who's you're not related to at all, and then use it, and then marry her, and then use it after. Because at the time of writing, there has to be that there is a connection between them, that the get could have been given at the time of writing. Then you can use it at a later date. So in this case, we say it is a get because he could use it now. After you do kiddushin, that is a marriage bond that requires a get in order to get out of it. So since this guy who only has kiddushin can use the get now, therefore he can ask the scribe to write it now, even though he's only going to use it after the full marriage. Okay, good. So we know that law. Here's the question. Ulisha be'alma en get mipnei she'en bi'ado legadasha. Right, this is the background to a single woman in the world. You can't write a get and use it afterwards because you can't use the get now. You can't give a get. The get has no applicability to a single woman before there was any kiddushin. Okay, so now here's the question. Ba'ed ami bar Chama livim to mahu. What if the husband, the deceased brother dies, and now you have a Yevamah falling to a Yavam. And he goes to the scribe and says, "Can you write a get on my behalf? And then I'm only going to use it after the bi'ah. I'm going to do yibum, and then I'm going to give her a get." Is that zikah? Is that sufficient to make it like a kiddushin? Kevan de'agida be'karusato damya. Do we say that because they are connected, they're tied together with a zikah, so it's like kiddushin, and that way, since he could give a get now and it would have some effectiveness, therefore it's a valid get and he can give it after they are fully married. Or dilma kevan delo avad b'ma'amad lo teko. Or do we say he didn't do ma'amad, so this get is not going to have anything to work on. If he does ma'amad, the deceased dies. The man does ma'amad. Now there is a kiddushin type of connection that will require a get. In that case, for sure, if he writes the get at that point and gives it after bi'ah, yes, for sure that would be valid. That would be the same as the previous case, because then he's going into the kiddushin and the su'in track. But in this case, do we say that yes, the zikah is itself like erusin, or do we say no? If he didn't do ma'amad, then the zikah is like nothing, and this get, although we give it some credence midrabanan just as a chumrah, but really it doesn't do anything. And in terms of the get, that get will not be usable after they get married, and we leave this question unresolved. All right. Next question. Ba'er Rav Hananya katav get lezikato velo lema'amaro velo lezikato mahum. Okay, someone, he a yavam and yavama, and he does ma'amar also. So at this point, he really has to undo two things. He has to undo the original zikah. I mean, if he wants to separate from her, if he did ma'amar, he could do biyah. But if he wants to separate from her, he has to undo two things: the original deoraita zikah that he has to do yibum, and he also has to undo the ma'amar. So if he writes a get at this point and he says this get is only for the zikah, but not from the ma'amar, right? Or he says it's only for the ma'amar and not for the zikah. I only wanted to work halfway. Mahu, what do we say about this? Ma'amad ilave zika karameh v'hava aleh kemegaresh chasi isha. V'meged chasi isha lo asa velo kilum. One side of it is that it will be ineffective because do we conceptualize the ma'amad going on top of the zikah, that they are now an intertwined double bond. And now if he says, I want this get to only affect one part of it, so it's like zero, because in a general case, if someone says, I want to divorce half of you, that's zero, right? You can't divorce. It's not unlike half of a slave. You can have such a thing, half free, half slave. But you can't have a woman who's half divorced and half not divorced. It's either all or nothing. If she can't go and fully get married to someone else, then it's a zero divorce. And so do we say the same thing here, that the two connections, the ma'amad and the zikah, are intertwined and you can't do anything to half of it, so it's worth zero. Or do we treat them as separate connections, and the zikah is one deoraita, regular connection that he has to undo, and the ma'amad is a separate drabanan connection, obligation that he has to undo separately. And therefore, if he gives a get and says, I want this to only be for ma'amad, then it would actually be effective. Luckily, we actually have an answer in this case, at least according to Rava. V'tifshot le mid Rava, dama Rava natan get le ma'amaro hutra sarata. Rava says that if someone, you have a yavam and who has zikah to a yevamah, good, the zikah is there, and then he does ma'amar, good, and now he gives a get, and the get he specifies will be only to undo the ma'amar, then that works, the ma'amar is gone, and the co-wife will be permitted. In other words, in general, when you do ma'amar to one of the co-wives, then that's it. You have to do yibum with her, and all the other ones become prohibited. Just like once he does bi'ah with one, then all the other ones, the zikah goes away. So normally we would say he would be prohibited, but because he undid the ma'amar with the get, so now the rival wife is available for levirate marriage again. So you see, according to Rava, yes, in fact, you can separate the zikah from the ma'amad connection. Now, Rava peshita le, Rav Hananya mi'ba'ele mai teko. Okay, good. So we have an answer for Rava, but this is not a baraita, this is not a Tana'itic source, and therefore it's not authoritative upon everybody else, upon any other Amora. And so while Rava does have an answer for himself, Rav Hananya does not have an answer, and so we leave that unresolved for Rav Hananya. All right, now we quote the next part of the Mishnah. Halas ve'asa ma'amad. First he does chalitza, and then he does ma'amad afterwards. And in general, right, that we said that there's a rule, nothing after chalitza is effective. Okay, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Zo Divrei Rabbi Akiva Damar en Kiddushin Tofsin B'Chayaveh Lavin. So, by saying that nothing after chalitza has any effect, and therefore this ma'amad is nothing, you could just ignore it, you don't have to give a get after it. This only makes sense, Rav explains, according to Rabbi Akiva. Because Rabbi Akiva says that when you have a chayaveh lavin, and this is a chayaveh lavin, someone who does chalitza, the rule is once you refuse to build, that's it. You cannot build anymore. Once you do chalitza, you cannot do yibum anymore. And if you try to do it, that would be an isur lav. Now, while for the chachamim, for the majority, in isur lav, you can do kiddushin with. You're not allowed to, but if you do kiddushin, the kiddushin will be valid. For Rabbi Akiva only, however, he says that en kiddushin is not valid, does not take hold in chayaveh lavin. So once you do chalitza, that is chiyuv lav, and therefore the ma'amar or kiddushin or anything else that is similar that you would do after the chalitza has no effect. Good. Aval chachamim omrim yesh achar chalitza kilum, but chachamim would disagree with our Mishnah. And they would say that there is after chalitza something, because just in a regular case, someone does chalitza with Yavam, gives chalitza to Yevamot, and then he goes ahead and gives her kiddushin. Hachamim would say that works. The kiddushin is effective, and therefore, this case also, he does ma'amad after the chalitza. The ma'amad will be effective. So our Mishnah is only like Rabbi Akiva. Okay, now we ask, Umi masit mukmat la Rabbi Akiva, v'hakatani resha. natan get ve'asa ma'amar siricha get v'chalitza. V'Rabbi Akiva kevan dihab la get mimehani ba ma'amar. So it can really be like Rabbi Akiva. Look at the case earlier in the Mishnah, where if he gives a get first and then he does ma'amar, so he needs to give another get to undo the ma'amar, and he has to do chalitza to undo the original zika. Now, if it is in fact Rabbi Akiva, once you give a get, then that should be it. It should be finished, and we should say the same thing, right? He gave a get, so that should undo it. Undo even the zikah. That's what we're assuming right now. And then the ma'amad ineffective. So why does the Mishnah itself say that after a get, if you did ma'amad, the ma'amad here is effective, you have to give another get? According to Rabbi Akiva, the get should be final. And we know that Rabbi Akiva thinks this from the following Braita v'hatanya. Rabbi Akiva omer minayin noten get livim to shnesra alav olamit. Someone gives a get to the Yevamah, even though it's not chalitza, it's a get. She is prohibited forever. It is a final act. Shene emad lo yuchal ba'alah harishon asher shedecha achad shiluach. This pasuk is about returning a divorcee. After she gets married to someone else, that's prohibited. But Rabbi Akiva says these are the words asher shilecha comes to add yet another case of someone, even if they didn't get married in between, they are prohibited to take them back. So it's not a regular divorcee, because a regular divorcee you can take back if she wasn't with anybody else in between. Rather, Rabbi Akiva learns from this pasuk also that a yevama, once you give a get to her, she becomes prohibited permanently, and therefore no act for after that, no kiddushin will take effect. So this is the question: how come if you say the Mishnah is Rabbi Akiva, how come in the Mishnah in the Resha says that if you did get and then ma'amad, then you have to give another get to undo the ma'amad? Shouldn't need anything after a get according to Rabbi Akiva, or according to this Baraita. You see, this Baraita assumes that giving a get is in fact fully effective for a Yevama. But we answer that Amar Rav Asher get Yevamin midrabanan ukra asmachta be'alma. Rav Asher says no. In fact, even according to Rabbi Akiva, a get for a Yevama is only midrabanan, because it will get confusing. Because if you say that a get is not really midorais, it's not effective. If you say get is not effective, and people generally associate a get with something that separates, then they're going to think of a chalitza also as something that separates. If the get is not effective, maybe the chalitza is also not effective, and then they're going to think they can the brother can go do yibum, and that will lead to problems. So that's where the Rabbanan came and said, okay, we're going to make the get effective lechumra only. But in fact, on a doraita level, the get does not do anything, and the zikah is still there. And so, even according to Rabbi Akiva, on a doraita level, that kiddushin will have some effect, and that's why you do have to give a get after. What about the pasuk that he quoted, from which he proved it? That was just an asmachta. That was just to lend authority, lend support to the law, but the law is in fact midrabanan. Okay, anyway, that's Rav Asher's interpretation to make everything fit. I'm guessing if we would look only at the Tanaitic sources, we would find that Rabbi Akiva probably himself considers this a deoraita. All right, Tanyana Mehachi, and we have a baraita that supports the explanations that we just said. Amar Rabbi Yudanasi says, Ena devrim halalu amurim ela li Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi says this Mishnah is only according to Rabbi Akiva. This, by the way, is fascinating regarding the editing of the Mishnah, that it be included a whole Mishnah that is a minority opinion. But he acknowledged that this is the case. And we're going to see that he himself does not agree, and the majority of sages do not agree. Okay, so this is only Rabbi Akiva shaya oseh halusa ke'arva, because according to Rabbi Akiva, someone who is a halutza is treated the same as we would all treat in arva, just like regarding erva, kiddushin, isur karet. Kiddushin does not work, nothing else after her works. So too, according to Rabbi Akiva, he treats every lav, including a halutza, the same way. And that's why he keeps repeating, en achad chalitza kelum. Aval chachamim omerim, yesh achad chalitza kelum. However, the majority of sages say that after chalitza, there is something that chalitza, because it's only an isur lav. If someone does kiddushin afterwards, a ma'amad afterwards, those things can take hold. You're not allowed to marry a chalutza, but if you do, it's valid. So you have to do something to go back and undo it. Va'ani Omer, Yehuda Nasi himself has a compromised position. He says, Ematai bizman shekidesha l'shum ishut, aval kidesha l'shum yavmut, and achad chalisa kilum. When would I agree with the sages that there is something afterwards? When you do kiddushin as a regular marriage. You have a chalutza here. He did chalitza. Once he rejects her, he's not allowed to take her back. As a yevama, that is the law. It's a lav. But if he does kiddushin as a regular marriage, then that works as it would according to Chachamim any isur lav. But if he does a ma'amar type of kiddushin, he says, you will be mikudeshet li be'ma'amar yevamin, as a yevama. Well, then that doesn't work because you did chalitza already, so that you lost the opportunity. There's no zikah here. You can't bring back that zikah after chalitza. There's nothing in this kiddushin because it's l'shum yavmut. There's nothing. So in that case, he would agree with Rabbi Akiva. Good. Tanya idach, another braita that's similar. Hacholes livimto v'chazar v'kiddusha. Someone does chalitza first, and then he does kiddushin. Rabbi Omer, im kiddusha l'shum ishut tzricha hamenu get. If you did just regular kiddushin, then you need a get because it's a yisur lav. But like any yisur lav, it'll work if you do kiddushin. According to Rabbanan, l'shum yavmut en tzricha hamenu get. However, this is according to Yehuda Nasi, same as what we said here. If you do it as a yevama, as a ma'amad for yevamin, well, no, you already did chalitza, so that's it. You can't. This kiddushin is a category error, and therefore it has no validity, and you do not even require a get. However, Chachamim omerim ben shekidusha l'shum yishut ben shekidusha l'shum yavmut tzricha hamenu get. Chachamim disagree, and then they say no matter what type of kiddushin, whether you did a regular one or you did a type of ma'amad, and you said this is for yibum, for ma'amad of yevamin, you still need a get. So this is a good question. Why do Chachamim require a get in this case when you only did it for yibum? So let's see. We're going to see several answers. Amar Rav Yosef, my tamad Rabbi asauha ke'oder benichse hager uchsavur shelo hen delakane. Rav Yosef said, even though the intention was for the wrong intention, the act is still basically the same act. He's giving her money and saying that I want you to be betrothed unto me. Now, what is this like? It's like the possessions of the property of a convert. If you have someone who converted to Judaism, and let's say they have no children of their own after the conversion, so what happens to their inheritance? The inheritance does not go to his biological relatives because once he converts, he's like a newborn baby, and his biological relatives are not legally related to him, so they do not inherit. And since he doesn't have any Jewish children of his own, therefore his property becomes hefker, becomes ownerless, and the first person to come and claim it gets it. Now, how do you claim property? It's not just by yelling. You have to do something to acquire it, improve the land in some way, enclose it with a gate, or hoe it. That would be a way to do it. So now in this case, you have a neighbor who comes and he's hoeing this property of a convert who just died and no one else claimed it yet. But he's a neighbor and he thinks he's hoeing his own land. He didn't realize that he's over the border. And in that case, he does not acquire it because even though he's doing the act, because he's not doesn't have the right intention, his act is meaningless. And so Rav Yosef says that is the explanation of Rabbi. Why does Rabbi make a distinction between these two? Well, even though it looks the same, if you did it for proper intentions, I'm doing this for Ishut, then yeah, it works. But if you do it as for Yibum, well, no, that train left the station. You already did Chalitza, and so there you had the wrong intention. So that explains why, in the case when you did Yibum, it would not work. Whereas Chachamim would say, you did the act, it doesn't matter what your intention is. So either way is okay. All right, so that's Rav Yosef's explanation. Amar le Abaye midameh Rabbi challenges and says, this is not the same. In the case of the guy hoeing his neighbor's property where he thinks it's his own, he doesn't even have intention to acquire it at all. He just says, he just thinks he's hoeing his own property. That's why it doesn't work. But in this case, the man giving kiddushin is intending to acquire her as a wife. And whether he says the right thing or the wrong thing, says it as yibum or as yishut, is not the same, because at least he has intention to acquire. What our case is actually like. It'll be like someone who is hoeing the property, the land of a certain convert who died, but he thinks it's a different convert. At the same time, two different converts died without any halachic relatives. And so he thinks that this is Mr. A's property, but in fact it's Mr. B's. In that case, he would acquire it, even though he had the wrong person in mind. That doesn't matter. He is intending to acquire this land through hoeing. And so he would acquire it, and therefore this would be the appropriate analogy. And so according to that, even the B would say, oh, I intended to acquire it, so both cases should acquire it. So this cannot explain the B's opinion. So rather, a next explanation. So rather, it's a case where he said to her, be betrothed unto me, through ma'amad of a Yevamah, as a Yevamah. He said that explicitly. Rabbi Sabar ma'amad ilave zika karameh. V'atay chalitza afka'ata lezika. Rabbi says that when does ma'amad work? When there's already a zika. There's already a zika of Yevamin, and then the ma'amad can come upon it, add to it, and make it stronger. And in that case, because they're all intertwined, the chalitza will come and break it. But if there is no zika in the first place, because you already did the chalitza, that chalitza already broke it, then you can't. The ma'amad is ineffective. So because he said it explicitly, ma'amad yevamin, and there is no zika for it to add on to, therefore it cannot work. That's the explanation of the B. Rabbanan said that these two connections are separate connections. The zikah is one thing. The ma'amad is another thing altogether. And the ma'amad is not dependent on there being a zikah in the first place. The ma'amad, even if it's for ma'amad yevamin, can work by itself, even though you said the weird language. Doesn't matter. It's actually not related. Just like when there was a zikah, if he said, be betrothed unto me as a ma'amad yevamim, it would have worked. Here also it works because it's independent of the original. And so this would explain the difference of opinion between Rabbi and Rabbanan according to Abaye. Next comes Rava, who gives yet another interpretation related, similar to the one before. He says, I disagree with you, Abaye. If you said the word ma'amad yevamin, then everyone would agree, even Rabbi Yehuda Nasi would agree, that this does take effect. Even after the chalitza, you said ma'amad yevamin. Ma'amad yevamin is a separate thing from zikah, has nothing to do with it, and therefore it will take effect even when the zikah is broken. Rather, what is the case that they disagree about? He didn't say ma'amad, but rather a zikah. So he says, I want you to be betrothed with or through the zikah, that is the zikah of Yevamin. So to be savad yesh zikah, to be in general, according to this opinion, says that a zikah is like a marriage, right? This was related to the general machloket we've seen many times of yesh zikah or en zikah. So he says, yes, it is like a full marriage. And so therefore, if they have a zikah and he says this language, then yes, that ma'amad will be effective because it's relating to the zikah, and zikah is effective. However, if he does chalitza, then it undoes the zikah. And so now that ma'amad has no zikah to bolster, has no zikah to attach to. And that's why if he uses a type of language like this, after the chalitza, it is ineffective. Whereas V'Rabbanan Sabre and Zikah, Rabbanan say in general that the Zikah, the responsibility, is not like a marriage. It's only a potential that you can do. You need to do something, but is not in fact like a marriage at all right now before he does any chalitza or yibum. So therefore, meikara ilo amar lahit kachili bizikat yevamin. Therefore, even before the chalitza, when he uses the language, be betrothed unto me through the zikah of yevamin, it works. Everyone agrees it works before chalitza. It works just by using this language, even though there is no zikah. I mean, there is zikah, but zikah is weak because he says en zikah. So therefore, if it works, even before the chalitza, when in any case en zikah, mila mahane, hashtana mehane. So since it works after, it should work after before. It should work after the chalitza as well. After the chalitza breaks the zikah altogether. Okay, nothing fundamentally changed. There was, we say en zikah before, and now there is really no zikah. But this language nevertheless works either way, and that would explain Rabbanan. Tomorrow we'll see 3 more interpretations of this machloket, and we'll hopefully complete the 5th perek. Baruch Adonai Olam, Amen v'Amen.